Welcome to Act 2 of our 100 Years of Chaplin at Essanay episode. Now, it was 100 years ago that Chaplin started his Essanay film series, and if you didn't listen to Act 1, feel free to go back and listen to that because we kind of dive deep right back into the discussion because there's a lot to talk about here. So, why don't we pick up with a few comments from the last episode regarding people's favorite Essanay films?
I'll read one from Nancy Cassidy. She says, I do love The Bank too, and others you mentioned, but something about the story in The Tramp really gets to me. My favorite scene is, of course, the ending when he's walking down the road temporarily forlorn, and then you see in his body language he's thinking, I'll be fine, and he kicks up those heels. That's what I love the most. He's practically echoing his own future in a few years when people will start turning against him, and he just about kicks up his heels too and says, fine, shoot your best shot, I can take it, and he did. That's our Charlie. So that was sweet.
Gisela Gambini, she posted a couple cool photos. She loves Burlesque on Carmen, she loves The Champion, and she loves The Bank. Thinking back, we talked about The Champion last episode, but that was definitely a foreshadowing to City Lights, which I didn't even think
Yes.
about.
Absolutely.
Yes. If you watch his films, you see boxing in a lot of them, even if it's only the tramp bobbing and weaving, but he loved boxing.
And I'll take this time to mention that Gisela also accurately discovered that photo that I posted of me in front of the Chaplin studio. She figured out that it was the door that he goes into on How to Make Movies that plays as his office. I'm not sure that was officially his office. I think he was just using that for the film. But it's also the doorway in the film Sunnyside when he comes out and he hops in the Model T to take Edna and the kids out.
That's A Day's Pleasure.
Sorry, A Day's Pleasure.
Yeah.
That's what I meant.
Yeah.
But I remember when I went there and I was just walking around the area and I looked at this little spot and I go, something stands out to me. This spot looks familiar to me for some reason. So I just walked up there and I took a picture in front of it. And it wasn't until later on that I really started thinking about it. And I went online to figure out where it was, and right away I pulled up A Day's Pleasure, and it looks the same. The bricks are the same. The only thing that's different is that that's not a door anymore. It's like sealed off.
Oh, okay.
But it's amazing if you look at the way it looked in 1919, and you look at it now, it's like the other side of the road was all like nothing. There's nothing there.
Right.
It's all empty. Now it's gas station and gift shops and there's a strip club like right across the street.
How the times have changed.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. Did you have one you wanted to read, Sarah?
Yeah. Let's see. From Alani Tyra, I hope that's how you pronounce her name. She says that she really likes The Bank, A Woman, and The Tramp, and she mentions that she lives 10 minutes from Niles, where the Essanay Silent Film Museum is, and she likes to walk down the Niles Cannon Boulevard where the end scene of The Tramp walking shot was shot. And I just really like her brief background about that, which is pretty cool. She gets to live so close to where Chaplin filmed a lot of his scenes in his films.
And she says that there's a Chaplin Days in June. I've been to Los Angeles, but I've never been to Niles. I've always wanted to make that trip there. And I've always been interested in, because I was always worried about how much is there to do at this museum? Is it like a full day's worth of stuff? Or is it just something that you do, for 2 hours? I'd really like to check it out. And if they had Chaplin events there, that'd be a perfect opportunity to go and see that.
And this year, they really should, because it's the 100th anniversary of his Essanay films.
Right.
Definitely. Well, we're going to hop right back into our topic here because we're going pretty deep into the SNA period. There's a lot of stuff here to chat about, so I want to get started. We followed up on the last show. We finished with
A Jitney
Elopement. So the next film will be The Tramp, right?
Yay! I love The Tramp.
Yeah, yeah.
Because The Tramp actually gives him a name, first of all, which the other films never quite did. I mean, in some of the credits, they would say a tramp or like a fool or something like that, or Charlie. But there was finally a film that gave him a name, that gave him an identity.
This is the film that cemented his persona as its own identity.
Right. Mm-hmm.
You know, it was the first step towards the kid, the first step towards City Lights. You know,
Mhm.
that tramp that's like all sympathetic and everything.
Yeah.
It really was the first time that he was able to start blending his pathos and the comedy, you
Mm.
know, in the tramp,
Yeah.
especially at the end of the film. And the first film where he's kind of going down that lonely, bleak road,
Which
and
is
then
a theme in many of Chaplin's later films as well, like The Circus, Modern Times. He does that very often, and it works. And the best part about Modern Times, when he's on the lonely road, he's no longer alone. He has Paulette Goddard on his arm, which is
hmm
nice. The tramp finally got the girl.
Yeah, this is the first film where he becomes a strict. I mean, there's comedy in there, but he's
Yeah.
almost more of a sympathetic figure than he is the roustabout Charlie of the early SNAs and the Keystone era. This is his
right,
first step into the sympathetic City Lights type tramp.
Hmm.
right.
Because doesn't he get shot at the end of the movie too?
And that, yes, and that's an interesting thing because Charlie Chaplin in a lot of his films, he was almost like a cartoon in the sense that, a lot of the kicking and punching, and he did it so over the top. It's like a cartoon. If the
Yeah.
anvil drops on somebody's head, you don't feel the pain because it's so over the top. When he gets shot, he actually shows pain, and it's kind of like then you feel like, wow, he was really hurt. So that was different because usually, he'd get hurt and you would just be like, think nothing of it because it was done over the top. This was done more subtle that you felt like, oh wow, and then he passes out. So that was different than you would see in previous films.
And he doesn't get the girl at the end.
No, he's
No,
not.
no.
There's a like Edna Suter or something comes in, and they clearly love each other. And the tramp is just a little bummed out because he thought he had a chance. So
He mistook her caring and taking care of him after he got shot with, real love. And then
yeah,
he realized, and I think that was Lloyd Bacon that played the her fiance, that they credit that in the film that it's her fiance. And I think once he seen him, he knew that, that it was done, that she, had somebody else.
So yeah, this is the first step towards Chaplin's image as it would be for the rest of his career. You
And
know,
the
there are
tramp
hints of everything in there.
and the tramp is the last film that he shot in Niles.
If we lead from the tramp into the next film, By the Sea, which is
Mhm.
obvious to me that he was probably working on By the Sea as a little throwaway, kind of like
yeah.
in the
Right.
There's
park.
only a one reel, so
At
Yeah.
the same
And
time as he was doing, he was probably working on the tramp and putting all his effort into that, but at the
yeah.
same
now,
time trying to churn out By the Sea to fulfill his contract.
actually, he left Niles heading for Los Angeles, where Essanay was giving him a studio. So in the meantime, he went to the beach and he did that little one reeler, which outside of the Bond, this was his last one reel film. And it was just a perfect take on his park comedies, except it was on the beach.
And there's that
And it's,
famous scene where they talk about in that one documentary where the
mm-hmm,
lone swimmer is running out to jump in the water,
yeah,
completely
Yeah,
oblivious they're filming a movie there at the same time.
yeah. It's
right.
just like not even an extra. It's just a regular person in the background. They're like, oh, this movie over there is filmed.
Yeah.
Okay.
You have to wonder though at this point, you know, wouldn't there be crowds of people waiting to watch? I mean, clearly Chaplin was recognized at this point.
Yeah.
Right.
So I'm surprised
Because
there weren't more people on the beach just watching what was going on.
there is a scene in that By the Sea, and it's really funny. It's like he's eating a banana
Yeah.
and he tosses it, and then okay, he drops the banana and then he steps on it. It was kind of funny. It's like you threw the banana out and then you fell on it, and it was just funny. But if you look, he's like outside a little restaurant and, on the beach. And if you look in the glass, you can see people that were watching it.
That's
So
what
it
I
is
love about
strange.
that's what I love about those early films is he had really no control over people that just showed up and wanted to watch what was going on, because it
Yeah.
wasn't in a designated spot like a studio where he could keep people sanctioned off. They went out to film on the beach or at some live event or somewhere. There's really no way you could keep people away. And the thing that these restorations bring out is you notice those things more than you ever would have before. The reflections
Right.
of people in the glass, the reflections of cameras in things. And that's my favorite
Right.
part about this stuff coming out on Blu-ray, is that you
Is
can
that
really see that stuff more than you ever could before.
Yeah.
and I think because it was a silent film that because I know I don't know 10 or 15 years later I was living in New Jersey and they shot a film. I can't think of the name of it in this little town. They didn't allow anybody within like 3 blocks of this area. So I'm wondering because in the silent era, people could talk while they were filming and it wouldn't get in the way of the film.
But at the same time, with people talking during silent, like while they're performing in silent films, they did eventually have to write dialogue because people were learning to read lips.
Right.
And
Yeah.
oh, they're talking about like what they're gonna have for lunch.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so the next film is Work.
Mm-hmm.
And that was done at it's the Bradbury Mansion. They did some of that, and from what I've read, like I think Harold Lloyd did some films there. Yeah, and I think Hal Roach actually shot films in the Bradbury Mansion. But Work is really funny. It has some really interesting camera effects. When
Him
especially when he's
going up the
right.
mountain.
Yeah, with the he's pulling this wagon and it's got all of his wallpaper equipment and he's pulling his boss and
Mm-hmm.
then and it has that famous, well, for me it's famous, that little nude statue where he kept getting obsessed with her and putting the little hula on her and
Another Chaplin
stuff
theme.
like yes, nude statues, yes.
Now, when I think of Work, the first version of this I saw was on one of those budget public domain VHS sets, and the version that I saw had this narration on it. And what I found out what this was, they took this film and it was probably used for distribution in the late 50s, early 60s, I want to say, somewhere around there. And there's a narrator, and he narrates the whole film. And while you wouldn't normally like that, I think that particular, I don't know, I just love when you're watching a film from 1915 being re-edited and narrated in 1960 for a release on television or something. And I can imagine that version was something they probably played 6, 7 a.m. in the morning
Mm-hmm.
at the time.
Yeah.
Right. And of course, Work at the end when there's an explosion
Yeah.
and he comes out of the oven. And it's interesting, that film, Work, and Dough and Dynamite were supposed to be shown in Manhattan at some film festival. And it was right after 9/11. And they pulled those two films from the program because of the explosions,
Ooh,
at the end of Work and Dough and Dynamite.
That's
So
amazing. It's amazing that a movie in 1915 could be censored and cut because of real world something that had happened.
right,
Oh
right.
my God.
They did both of those, Work and Dough and Dynamite. But I mean, Work is a cute film. I mean, Edna plays like a really ditzy maid. I mean, she's just, and
Her
her,
outfit.
yeah, her and Charlie have that little flirtation between them. But
Very genuine too.
right, and I think it was also a take on, labor. Like he was so mistreated by his boss and he was almost treated like a pack mule. So I think that was when, he was really starting to put into his films little societal things, a take. And I think there was a lot of people in the viewing audience that related to that.
Yeah.
So that's what really, kept cementing him with people. He was just a regular, guy, and everybody, was going through similar things.
Now we go on to the next film, the early mid-Essanays. There were a lot of Keystone-esque films and elements to those. As we get on to the later ones now, you're starting to see The Tramp, Work, The Bank, more serious elements starting to come in. So it's almost like his early SNAs were more of the Keystone variety, and now the ones we're getting
Right.
into now are more of the mutual-esque quality that he would start doing at that time.
Right. And
So,
it's like perfect transition.
Yeah.
but the next one, A Woman, is particularly notable because
Yeah.
this is the second and the last time he plays in drag.
He played in drag 3 times.
Right.
I think this is the last time he played
Right.
in drag.
Yes, it was a busy day, masquerader and Keystone in A Woman.
Yeah.
And for me, he's not as attractive in A Woman as he was in The Masquerader, but he's much more seductive. I mean, he's got these feminine wiles going on in this film, flirting and just,
Smiling, yeah.
yeah, he just takes on it, and it's just eerie because he was a small guy and he had small features, a lot of his features.
Yeah, it's convincing too.
His hands were very delicate. Yes, he's very convincing
Well,
as a woman.
like we said before, he's playing in this film the tramp who has to dress up like a woman to escape a situation.
Yeah,
and that's
right,
what he did
right.
in The Masquerader.
That's not what he did in Busy Day, though. Busy Day, he was just playing a woman.
Yeah,
So there
and
is
she's very unattractive.
there is a definite difference in the
Kind of
two.
mean, too.
Yes, yes.
The next film, The Bank,
Yeah, that's a really good one.
it is a
Oh
good
yeah,
one.
it's really good.
And it kind of uses the cliche, it was all a dream.
Right. Oh yeah, that's another very common theme in Chaplin films that he used a lot.
Yeah.
And
Kind of with shoulder arms, he does that. It was all a dream. Sunny
Side, right? The Gold Rush.
Yeah.
Was this the first film where that happened? Well, his prehistoric past was all a dream,
Oh, yeah.
Right.
but
Yeah.
it wasn't in the same vein as this one.
Mm-hmm.
And see, when I first started getting into Chaplin 4 years ago, I started on YouTube and the internet domain.
Yeah.
When I first saw The Bank, it cut off just at the end where he's kissing the mop. I didn't see until later. I seen a restored version that I seen. There's this whole other little where he goes up to Edna, and then he realizes, you know what? It was a dream. I didn't get her. She's got this other guy.
She never knew that I was interested.
Right. Then he takes the flowers and he back kicks them and walks away. So I was like, why would they cut that part out in any type of issue of the film?
They
They just
over
want to end on
time,
a happy note, like silly note.
over time though, those films got re-edited, redistributed.
Right, yeah.
There's multiple different versions of them. It was probably just it was either cut for time, or it was never there to begin with, and nobody knew until later on, and they found that clip and they put it back in.
Mm-hmm.
A Bank is a definite take on his Keystone,
Yeah.
the new janitor.
Yeah.
He did that a
Definitely.
lot.
Expanding on the old idea that he really didn't get to do in the fullest fruition. He redoes Essanay into a more substantial effort.
And there's an interesting thing, and that's what I love about Charlie Chaplin and his films. You always are able to find something new that you never seen before or you never noticed.
Yeah.
He used close-ups very seldom, and there's actually a close-up in The Bank. He's writing a note to Edna, and you see a close-up of his face. And, like, the first thing I noticed is like, wow, he used a lot of makeup, to play the tramp. And then I was like, why did he do the close-up here? It didn't make sense. It made sense to him. But it was just interesting. I'm like, oh, wow, I never noticed there's a close-up in The Bank. So that's what's fun. You always can find something that you never noticed before. And it
The
makes
close-up of him in City Lights is almost reminiscent of the close-up of him in The Bank when he realizes the mistake that had happened between him and Edna.
Yeah.
And you know what, Nigel? I never thought of that, but you're right. It's the hand to his mouth. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, when Charlie used a close-up, it was always for a reason. It wasn't just random.
Yeah.
Right.
It was, yeah.
All right, so the next film is Shanghai, another kind of throwaway comedy. Probably Charlie was working on The Bank, the
Yeah.
film he wanted to really put a lot of effort into, and to fulfill his contract yet again, he did a little boat
Yeah.
fun film. There really doesn't have there's not a whole lot of substantial qualities to it, but when I was rewatching it the other day, there's a lot of things that he would carry forth into The Immigrant.
Yeah.
The
Like
boat
the
rocking.
walking back and forth. And the immigrant, he has it like polished up with that. Versus Shanghai, he's still unsure how to do it. So
Yeah, and being seasick, and then actually, I guess it was like 6 months ago or whatever. Like I started thinking, like, what exactly? I didn't understand Shanghai, and then I read on it, and he's actually showing, and I think I did a post on that. He's actually showing that this actually happened. People would just pull people off the street, and throw them onto the boat and take them and kidnap them for them to do service on the ship. It was a common thing.
or
So
people,
that's
yeah, or people would just stow away like Ed
mhm,
Provence did at like even though it was her father's boat
right,
in the movie.
Now even think about that, how it carries over into the Gold Rush when Georgia Hale stows away on the boat.
right, and
Yeah.
and and also Shanghai, the storyline where her father wants the boat blown up so he could cash in on the insurance goes over to the firemen, where Edna's father wants the house burnt down so he can get the insurance. And in both films, Edna's in peril. Like,
Yeah.
the father has to rush because, oh my God, the boat's going to get blown up. My daughter's in it. The house is on fire. My daughter's in it. So that's, yeah, drawing those
You should
parallels.
just forget about the insurance money.
Yeah, exactly,
That's the cool
exactly.
thing. Like I said, going back to the Keystones and SNAs, people like to dismiss them as just the early films that don't have much substance to them. But if you watch these, you can really see things that he used later on in other films, and he never forgot anything. He never
Right,
forgot any gag or any kind of idea that he had, and if something he had done in a film years and years prior, he thought hadn't been done to the fullest, he would redo it in a later movie. Even
Mm,
in going into modern times, the staircase scene that was
right,
taken right from the Floorwalker. So
right.
that goes from 1916 to 1936, and he reused it again.
Which
right.
kind of, I think I mentioned in a previous podcast, I've heard people say, oh, Charlie and Buster and Harold were friends. They were, and they shared gags. And
They're
I
like
don't comment because I don't know for
acquaintances.
sure, but I'm like, I don't think he shared gags because he kept them in his head to to use, which he did a lot. But
The most memorable scene in Shanghai that I noticed was when the guys are falling into the water and they're trying to get him out,
Oh,
and
the
Charlie's
like
doing this kind
cook,
of like trying to dictate how the boat's gonna pick up these guys, and it keeps
like
dropping them back and forth.
like
But
when people are trying to like have an airplane come into the gate, like
right,
left,
yeah,
left, right. You're
I
good.
thought
yeah,
that was the most memorable shot of Charlie in that scene that I
Yeah.
noticed that I had kind of forgotten about. And I did also notice that on the Image DVD set, I know there's a Blu-ray set that's going to be coming out soon. Shanghai was probably the worst quality of
Hmm.
all of the
oh,
films.
terrible, yes, terrible.
So
And
hopefully when
actually,
the Blu-ray comes out, it'll be hopefully I'm hoping for that Blu-ray there's new scenes that they've put back in that they've found, because you never know with this stuff. Even on the Keystone set, there was footage I had never seen incorporated back into the movie. So
that, I mean, just kind of off topic real quick, that the fact that they were able to restore those keystones is nothing short of like a miracle. It's just, I can't even believe it. When you compare the films that you had to watch before the public domain, it was painful to watch them.
it was
So
like a
it's just,
detective trying to, because half the movies before the restorations came out, you had to like be a detective to try to figure out what was going on. Because half of the
right.
time the movies were such bad quality, people's heads were cut off the top.
Oh,
You
terrible.
couldn't
It did,
hardly see anything, and half the versions that were released were in other languages. Like Mabel's
oh,
Strange Predicament had like weird, yeah, I don't know if there was French or Spanish subtitles, but even if it had subtitles, I didn't even know what was going on. So it's a testament though to those films to show, even with terrible quality, subtitles in a different language, you could still kind of make out the story and you can still enjoy the movie
Yeah,
because the action was so easy
and
to
they
follow.
were probably the subtitles were probably in other languages because it was catering to an international audience rather than strictly an English speaking one.
That was
Well,
when the Keystone restorations came out. That was the one I was most blown away by was Mabel's Strange Predicament because the quality, the print was so much better than I was used to seeing. You could even see Charlie had like more makeup on his face to make him look older that he kind of
yeah.
ditched later on, but he's trying to make himself look like he's probably in his 50s.
Mm-hmm.
Probably due to the Senate thinking Max Sennett thinking he was an older person. So in those first two Tramp films, he almost makes himself look to be way older than he was.
Right, and Mabel's Strange Predicament was actually, like you said, it was the very first film that he dressed as a tramp for Senate. So yeah, you're right. He probably put on, a lot of makeup to make himself look older, and he does. Because when you look at him, he doesn't look. It's strange because he does look much older than 24. Where as he went along in his films, he started to look more youthful. The tramp is youthful, but
Yeah.
he looks older in his very early films.
Now, speaking of early, we're going to transition into the next Essanay, which is A Night in the Show. And
Oh
you
yeah.
can't get much earlier in Chaplin's career than Mummingbirds.
Right, right. That's a take on his, yeah, it was called Mummingbirds in England, and then when it came here and toured, it was a night in an English music hall. And he actually played two characters. Though the other character up in the balcony, he didn't spend a whole lot of time with him. It just did a few shots of
Yeah.
him. He was just like a pain in the ass, and he looked nothing like Charlie or the Tramp.
Honestly, I think the Mr. Rowdy character up in the balcony could have easily been played by Ben Turpin.
Oh yes, yeah, you're right. Yeah,
Like that
the
would have been
same kind of,
fine to me, but
yeah. At that time, I think Ben Turpin was with Keystone, and I don't think he wanted to work with Charlie anymore.
except in the we'll get to the next one, Burlesque on Carmen. He shows up.
Yeah, but he showed up. Him and Charlie weren't working together.
Right.
Yeah, that was,
Yeah.
the padded version.
So,
Anyway,
I proposed a question about A Night in the Show when I was rewatching it. Is Charlie playing the Tramp in this
I-
film, or
I was-
is he playing a different character? Because obviously the Tramp would not have enough money to go to an event like that. Sit down in the front row. He has like a tuxedo on. His hair's all slicked back.
I was going to mention that right before you said that. I was going to mention whether or not he's the Tramp. It depends on how you feel about it. For me, I think he is the Tramp, but other people may not agree with me, and that's fine. But still has those Tramp qualities about him. I mean, his appearance may be a little different and altered for like a more sophisticated Tramp, I guess.
The
But
Tramp was always evolving. Like in
Yeah.
each film, he could be either dirt poor, or he could be, he could have a little bit of money.
Yeah,
Or there's of course
exactly.
in like Mabel's, that film where him and Mabel Normand are married.
yeah,
Oh, his trysting place.
yeah, like sometimes he was married, sometimes he was alone, sometimes rich, poor, with a job, without a job. So
If there was video footage, which of course there's not, of his actual sketch that he did in Carno, if we were able to see that and see if he's directly picking up what that character did and putting it in Night in the Show,
I would
Right.
You
think
could say-
he would. I think he took the elements of that and probably adapted it to a film version. It's probably not exactly the same. Now, if you look at the Richard Attenborough Chaplin, is that what they're recreating in the beginning of that
Right.
film?
Yes, yeah, a night in the show. He's in the balcony, and not the balcony, but yeah, the little side thing. Yeah, it was a take on that.
And that
But-
was supposedly the night that Mabel Normand and Max Sennett discovered him.
oh,
Because that's when
Well-
they saw him on stage and he had the old man makeup on. and he was really good at slapstick comedy. And in my mind, that's what it looked like when they were there at the theater seeing him.
Yeah.
I don't know if Mabel, I mean, I know Mabel saw the event, saw that show, but I don't know if she was there the night that Mac Sennett saw him. I know that she saw him with Mac. I think it was in Los Angeles, but I mean, I don't know for sure, so I don't want to say, one way or the other, but it's strange because I know, like in a night, I know in Mummingbirds, he talks about, the strong man they had in the sketch, and I think there's a strong man in a night in the show, right?
I think so. But I know there's a two singer comedian people. There's a fire breather guy, which I noticed
With the
looked a
snake.
lot like a George
Right.
Méliès movie.
It did look like a George Méliès movie.
And then of course in A Night in the Show, there's a nude statue right there in the foyer, the foyer,
Yeah.
And
and
they're really showing the upper class versus the lower class, because the upper class is on the ground level and the
Yeah.
lower class is on the second level. And
right.
what's funny to me is, as much difference as they try to establish between the classes, all the things the lower class is doing to disrupt the people on stage, the high class people think it's hilarious.
Yeah.
So it's almost
Right.
like they're bonding as one audience
Yeah.
because both of them hate the entertainment on the stage and they're both screwing with them.
Edna looks stunning, but she had a really tiny role in this film, which was disappointing because she really did look, she had that headdress, that was really common in that period.
Very beautiful dress too. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
And I also noticed, obviously, the man in blackface up in the upper level.
Okay.
Did you say that was Leo White?
Yeah.
In a way, I think that was just Chaplin's way of cementing that this was the lower class, because that's what happened back then. The black people would have to sit in the back of the theater
Yep.
on the
But see,
upper level.
but in England, I don't think they definitely have a class thing. They still have it today, not to that extreme, but I think Sarah pointed out something interesting when she was talking about blackface, that Charlie being British, they looked at it differently
Yeah.
than they did here, so that, because when I first saw it, I was a little, and again, I have to use my own words, keep it in historical perspective, and I was like, that's strange that, why wouldn't he use, a black actor or whatever, but.
Were there any black actors working at Essanay?
I don't know.
No.
Probably
So
not.
that might have been what
Yeah.
it was. I'm sure if Chaplin had the ability to
might not
do
have-
so, he
They
would have
might have not
used.
hired one.
Right. Yeah.
This is really, to me, the last time anyone in blackface shows up in a Chaplin film.
Right. Right.
Yes.
That would
Right.
never happen again.
With the night in the show, there's also the pot, like the pies, like pie throwing.
Yes.
And he's sitting on that side pocket with
Mhm.
this like very large child behind him.
It looks
And-
like Roscoe Arbuckle
Was
to
that
me.
him?
Yeah, it does.
No, it looked like him.
Oh,
Yeah.
it did
No,
look like
it
him.
wasn't. Yeah. Yeah.
and
Also, there's all sorts of, like, the snakes and stuff that they use.
Mhm.
I mean, he even makes fun of that guy, the musician that's, like, shaking. He has, like, almost like it's Parkinson's or something. And, that's such a terrible thing to make fun of. But there's so many just little things in that film.
Yeah.
The ugly woman that he has to sit next to,
Oh,
that he's,
I
like,
think it
scared
was
of.
He was terrible.
appearance, but that's what the tramp does. But with the pie thing, with the kid was just like egging him on and
Right.
just being obnoxious, and Charlie's just not having it. And plus he hated doing that same old shtick time after
Right.
time. And to me, that large kid was a metaphor for Essanay, like pushing him to do like the typical slapstick stuff, like chase
Yeah.
scenes, pie throwing. And Chaplin's like, I'm better than this.
Yeah.
Like, get that away.
Yeah.
But he had to do it.
I have a feeling
Yeah.
that the pie throwing wasn't part of the original Mummingbirds
Probably not.
sketch.
No.
That'd be a big mess to clean up
Hey.
afterwards. Now we go on to the next film, Police. So if there's any film that we talked about, the bank kind of transitioning Chaplin into the later era of his career and elements he would touch upon, Police opens the film opens with him leaving prison, and you're not
Escaping.
entirely. No, I think he's let out in this
Oh,
one.
right, yeah. Wait,
The thing
I'm sorry.
is Police was released after Burlesque, but was it filmed before Burlesque?
I don't
Because
know. On
police,
the DVD set here, the restored Essanays, it's listed before Burlesque.
Long before.
but Police actually, as far as being released, was released in May 1916.
Mm.
Burlesque, which should have been released in December. But you know what? It was probably the same thing. Police should have been released. I don't know why they held up Police, but that should have been released way earlier than 1916.
Now, Police originally started off as a film called Life, which Chaplin had hoped to become a feature film, his first that he was working on, but due to the time constraints and the pressure that SNA was putting on him at the time, there was absolutely no way for him to finish the film as he had originally planned, so he kind of had to cut it down and edit it into a two-reeler.
You look doubtful.
Is that
No,
wrong?
no, I don't know if Life was separate from Police. It's strange because that scene in Life, which ended up in Triple Trouble, the kitchen scene, I don't know if that was shot when he was doing Police. But you're right. He wanted to make that feature film Life, and SNA wanted him to push out another shorter film, which was probably Police. Go ahead.
That's alright. No, this is what this is all about, so if there's any inconsistencies, go for it. Let me know. But basically what I read was he was working on Life, and they didn't want him to spend that much time on it, so he pretty much made Police, which was a condensed version of the Life movie he was trying to make.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of extra footage that ended up being from the footage he cut out to make it a shorter film that SNA hung on to, and years later, they took all that unused footage that Chaplin didn't use and
Mhm.
made a compilation film called Triple Trouble, which they released without Chaplin's consent, like
Ooh.
3 years later after Chaplin had been long gone from the studio.
Yeah.
And they
Yes.
billed it as the new Chaplin film.
Mm.
Which it was released in August 1918, so he was already with First National.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing, because of that, if you look at his First National films, the lobby cards and the posters, it has his signature on it.
Yeah.
And he put out ads saying, if you don't see this signature, that's not a new Chaplin film, And that film Triple Trouble also had, I don't know, I think they added parts from Work in it, some parts from Police that were actually in the release of Police, and then of course the padding, they padded scenes too.
Yeah, towards
But
the
that
end of
was,
the SNA Chaplin contract, things got really murky and really muddy. Chaplin was pushing to do more mature, longer films, and
mhm.
SNA was pushing the absolute opposite way. And there was really no way to come together on that at all.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, what they did was when Police came out and they took the footage on the side that he didn't use and they stocked it away and they just used every shot of it to try to make as much money off the Chaplin name as they could after he left the studio.
I mean, the interesting thing though is, as egregious as what they did as far as Triple Trouble, had they not done it, we never would have seen that footage.
True.
Because in Triple Trouble, the scene in the DOS house or the shelter is much more graphic. It's frightening.
The thing with Triple Trouble is that it's a lot of deleted scenes, whether or not it's ethical that they put it out there without Chaplin's consent, they still own the film. So they could do
Right.
whatever they wanted with it.
Yeah.
Right.
It just took them so long. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
1915 to 1918 in his career, he had already gone through Mutual. He was already with First National making, Shoulder Arms and all these real great films. And then out comes this Triple Trouble by SNA. It's like, where
Yeah.
did this come from?
And you know what?
Now that we have, DVDs and YouTube, we can go and go back and watch these films all the time. And now we notice, oh, that's the same shot from Work, or that's the same shot from Police. But 1916 to 1918, it's very seldom that somebody was going to notice that was the same shot from the film, a movie I
Right.
saw, 3 years ago. They're not going to remember that hardly.
And they
Yeah.
and they loved anything Chaplin. If you look at the ads for Triple Trouble, they made so much money because people just love Charlie Chaplin. And
Yeah, but
so,
Chaplin wasn't getting a dime from it.
nope, no,
And
he wasn't getting anything from that. And
it makes you wonder, why did SNA put it out 3 years later of all times? Like, were they hyped up on that Chaplinitis that everyone else was? Or
well,
was SNA not doing very well financially and they
oh yeah, no,
wanted to?
you're right. SNA went right into the can. But between 1916 and 1918, SNA was also putting out these compilation films.
Oh.
Chase Me Charlie was one of them. They took like 6 or 7 of his SNAs and they pulled out little scenes and made this new little storyline. Like, oh, Charlie shows up for work, his new job, and then he has to leave his wife, Tramp. You know what I'm saying? They threaded a story, and they did a couple of those. So they were constantly making money off of him. And Triple Trouble, they were cashing in on the fact that this Charlie was with First National. So they put that out as a new Chaplin film, and people loved it.
It's
Mm-hmm.
almost like in the early 60s, before the Beatles really took off in America, they had signed their first album over to this record label called VJ in the United States. And at that time, they weren't that big of a deal over here, and VJ was sitting on the album for the longest time. And then when the Beatles finally broke big, VJ for some reason had the rights to like 10 Beatles songs for like a year and a half or something before the rights went back to Capitol, who owned it in the United States when they became famous.
Yeah.
VJ released those same 10 songs on album after album after album in different orders with different covers, on 45s. Any way they can make money off of those 8 to 10 songs that they owned for, a good year or so. There's even a whole book that somebody put out about all the different versions of this album that were issued and how many counterfeited albums that were made off of those. That, to me, makes me think directly to the SNA situation with Triple Trouble and Burlesque. It's just, how can we take this footage of Chaplin that we know we can sell? Now, how do we take this footage and make it into a whole nother movie and sell it again and sell it again and sell it again as a new product? How many times can we do this without being found out?
Right. I was just reading because I wanted to confirm it in my own head that G.M. Anderson actually left SNA in 1916.
Oh.
And a lot of people say it was because of how they were treating Charlie Chaplin. I think he just became sick of, the whole thing. And it says here that he retired from acting. He sold his part ownership of SNA in 1916. The thing with SNA too is they lied. Oh, they said that, we're going to be talking about Burlesque in a second, but real quick, they said that that was the very first film that Charlie ever edited himself, and he did such a poor job, they had to go in and fix it. So, I mean, they were just terrible, just terrible.
Just shows you how different the landscape is now for this kind of stuff. How this stuff was able to go on back then without anyone really being able to do anything about it. And now everything's so tightly strung legal-wise, you can never get away with the things that they got away with back then. But as a film itself, Police is actually pretty decent.
Yeah.
Yes.
I
It's
agree.
a pretty good film. And there's this documentary that they released, narrated by Burgess Meredith, called The Chaplin Puzzle, which it's a really cool documentary, and it's on YouTube. And they take the film Police, and they take the scenes that were cut out or whatever that were in Triple Trouble, and they do their best to reconstruct the version of Police that Chaplin was kind of hoping to make into the movie Life. And it has a really nice score, and it's edited really well, and whether it's, officially what Chaplin's concept was for it, but it's the closest thing that we're going to get to Chaplin's version of Life that he wanted to put out in 1916.
Right. Like you said, some people don't agree with that, but it is. it's interesting because you got to, I mean, the bottom line is you got to see that footage. And if SNA had just tossed it aside, which I'm sure there was lots, just like the mutuals, I'm sure Charlie cut a lot of footage from his SNAs and they're gone. So, I mean, the fact that this footage, was preserved, even though it was for nefarious reasons, that we got to see that even in 1915, when he was doing that, that he was thinking, so much broader and that he advanced so much in the 2 years that he had been making films. It's amazing that he was such a visionary.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing, though, when you look at Triple Trouble, that they took this footage of the burglar from Police, and
Mm-hmm.
they dressed somebody else up like that guy from that movie to try to bring the scenes together from the 1915 shots of Chaplin to the
Right.
1918 stuff that was shot without consent of Charlie. And there's that one scene where Charlie takes the garbage out,
Mm-hmm.
and it's
Yes.
what, 1915, and he throws
Right.
it over the fence onto, what was that, Leo White?
Yes.
And
In
that's a shot from
Chicago.
1918.
Yeah.
Right, Chicago winter, winter in Chicago, 1918. Yeah, you mentioned in a post yesterday that the guy had three arms. It looked like, and it wasn't Charlie. This guy had big arms. So it was, it's funny.
But like now we can go back and look at this stuff and notice all these little things. But back in 1918, there was no real way to go back
Right,
and relook at this stuff. You saw it once, and then that was it. So
right,
they definitely
right.
accomplished their mission in trying to save that footage and make it into a film. It's obvious the scenes that don't have Charlie in it are just awful.
Yeah, terrible. It was like a German bomb maker, and yeah, it was Colonel Nutt. Yeah, yes, you can definitely tell when you're watching things that are not Chaplin shot, that it just had a different feel to it.
Thrown
Mm-hmm.
together. Now that
Right,
set a bunch of legal stuff into action with Charlie and SNA.
right. And then after that, every contract that he signed, he had to have control over what went on the screen. Nobody could ever do that to him again. So, it was like a lesson learned.
Yeah.
And then, like I said, with his first nationals, he still had to, by him signing the lobby cards or the posters, letting people know that these were in fact new Chaplin films. I understand why he did it, but it still didn't kind of matter because people were going to see Charlie Chaplin. I mean, during this period, his keystones were still being shown around theaters all over the country, over the world. So people
Like
loved him. So
a knockout. A knockout was reissued as a Chaplin movie when it was a Roscoe Arbuckle movie that just had a little Chaplin cameo in it.
right, right,
But it didn't matter if they had his name on the marquee, and even if he was in the movie for 30 seconds, they would trim out as much as they could of the other actors and keep everything they could of him and just call it a Chaplin film because Charlie had no control over any of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Tilly's Punctured Romance was a Marie Dressler starring film with Mabel and Charlie co-starring. After that initial run, every time it was released, it was a Charlie Chaplin starring vehicle. Even
Yeah,
though, I
with
mean,
everybody else, yeah,
right,
thrown
right.
in there. The next film in this SNA debacle was called Burlesque on Carmen. Tell us why Charlie decided to do a parody of the opera in the first
Um,
place.
Supposedly around 1915, Carmen was everywhere. It's an opera, it's a stage show, and Hollywood actually did two films in 1915, a Carmen film. One was with Geraldine Ferrara, and the other one was with Theda Bara, which sadly most of her films are lost.
Yeah.
Now, the version of Geraldine Ferrara, he seemed to have actually copied that, like parodied it all the way down. So he did that, and the thing is that I think it's an exceptional film, but because of it being associated with, the padding and the four-reeler, the two-reeler, the lawsuits, it takes away from what a great film that it was. I mean, the period costumes, Edna was stunning in it, and so different than we usually see Edna. Edna's usually quiet and reserved, and here she's being very flirtatious, and the end of it it's just classic Chaplin as far as you think he's taking you down one road of emotions, and then just like that, he turns it around, and it's just like brilliant, brilliant.
That
And
has to be one of the best endings to any Chaplin movie because it's
right,
so different from anything that he'd ever do again. And
Right.
the ending of that film really shows you that he could have been a dramatic actor if he wanted. I mean, not that he wasn't, but he could have been a real
right,
serious dramatic actor if he chose to
right.
be. Because it goes into this really weird place at the end. And it's funny because I took a Spanish class when I was in high school, and I of course used this as an excuse to show burlesque on Carmen. And the teacher was like, "Oh, I don't care, whatever," you know. So I put it in,
Uh,
and they were watching it. And at the end, when things got real serious, these kids were
right,
like, "Whoa, you know, what?" They were all
right,
confused because it gets
right,
really serious at the end.
It does get
right.
serious.
And then, you know,
Yes,
of course, when the gag is realized, you know, they laugh. So it goes to show you that even 100 years later, that particular scene at the end where he kills Edna and then kills himself is really powerful. As in, it's shocking, even 100 years later, to an audience who's not expecting that at all.
Right.
and but the sad thing is outside of the Chaplin community world, whatever, most people don't even know about it, and it's such a great film, but
It,
it's mired in,
it's
you
kind
know.
of off the beaten path for a Chaplin film
Hmm.
because once again, is he the tramp?
Right,
And it's just
Well,
very different because it's a parody film. Like Chaplin had done many satires, like later on, like Shoulder Arms, Great Dictator, even
hmm,
modern. You can argue Modern Times, but parodies aren't Chaplin's usual go-to. So it was very different.
and that's why I was trying to figure out, was it Charlie's idea to do this? Because it doesn't seem like, because he's making, you know, Police, and he's making Work, and he's making these more mature movies, and all
Hmm.
of a sudden at the end he decides to do a parody of a movie that's out and popular.
Yeah.
right.
It just doesn't seem like to me that would have been something that he would have chosen to do at that time, but
But
maybe he really had a affinity towards the story itself and decided just to do it. Because I don't think, because to me it seems like that's something that another lesser comedian would have had to resort to parody a very popular movie to get an audience to come in. But Chaplin was so big at this time, it doesn't seem like to me he would have needed that. You know what I mean? He wouldn't have needed
right,
that to promote one of his
but
films to get people in.
it could have also been because the movie was everywhere. It was everywhere, Carmen, and might have just been his take, like enough already, you know.
Hmm.
And then I showed you, Nigel, and I'll definitely post it to the page. Then we had this little juvenile film group, these little kids
Yeah.
that did the parody of the Charlie Chaplin parody, and it clearly shows it in the little article that that's exactly what they were doing. And it's just funny. You see these little kids in a pose, and you're like, oh my God, that's Charlie and Edna. And the thing is, I've only seen pictures of the Geraldine Ferrara Carmen. I've never seen the film. I don't even know it, and I should see if it's still available. But the pictures I have seen, I'm like, wow, that looks just like Charlie and Edna in those poses. So yeah, it's really a unique film. Like I said, it's just unfortunate that it's mired in the lawsuits. Charlie had to sue Essanay to get them to not release it, and he lost, and he took to his bed. He was literally sick about it. And then, you know, most people have just seen the four-reel Carmen. And, you know, it's funny. Before I ever seen the two-reel, when I was watching it, something, and I couldn't even describe it, but something felt off. I'm like, this is a terrible film. And it just surprised me because I'm like, you know, like I was getting madly in love with Charlie Chaplin. And I'm like, you know, and then when I found out what the story behind it, I'm like, oh, that makes perfect sense. Because Ben Turpin's character, I'm like, well, what is he doing in this
Yeah,
film?
he's kind of just like there.
Right, yeah, yeah, you
So
know,
when
and
so I was always under the impression that the two reel version of Burlesque on Carmen was released, and then S&A a couple years later did what they did with Triple Trouble, took a Chaplin two reeler and just added a bunch of new stuff to it and re-released it as a feature. but I discovered that that was wrong, that the two-reeler of Burlesque on Carmen was never even released. And it was only
Right.
until the later restorations were put out by Image and David Shepard that
Right.
they cut the film down back to what Chaplin had intended it to be. Not, I
Oh,
was confused by that because I was just under the impression that SNA did the same thing with Triple Trouble that they did, was just add a bunch of extra scenes and re-release it later on. So I'm glad to have that whole thing cleared up.
right. And I saw that ad. It was in December 1915, and it's saying coming soon, a new Chaplin film, a two-reeler. And that was in December, and that was the intended release date. And I just think that just payback, whatever you want to call it, they took that and grabbed Leo White and said, I need you to direct some scenes and put Ben Turpin in and they took Charlie's outtakes and threw them in there. And so it goes on for like 45 minutes, and it's just, and David
Now,
Shepard, when he cut it down, I guess he was, trying to find the version that he felt would be a Chaplin, edit.
why did SNA decide to take a two-reeler and extend it into a four-reeler? Just for monetary gain?
More money, more money, because if you sell a four-reeler to a theater, you can ask a lot more money. And really, I think that the two-reeler is like 30 minutes, and then the four-reeler is 45 minutes. So definitely that was it. And you know what? I think there was a lot of bad blood between SNA and Charlie Chaplin, and they probably knew what a control freak or whatever you want to call it, and they probably knew that this would really get him. The fact that they were adding all of these scenes, and he sued them, and supposedly Charlie redid his contract with SNA in the summer of 1915, and SNA was saying that he still owed them films, so they were taking the four-reeler and using that to fulfill his contract.
It's
Um,
like when record labels, they'll sign a band, and like I'm a big Kiss fan, so I know a lot of nerdy stuff about this too.
uh-huh.
They would release these compilation albums because they had to fulfill a contract, and they would release a compilation album like every 2 years, and it was
Right,
overkill. But they weren't putting out really any new material, so they had to release something to fulfill their contract. So they go back and release a greatest hits, and then with one cover, and then they put a new greatest hits out with another cover. And a lot of fans blame the band for these things. Oh, they're just, they want money and they're just trying to scam the fans out of more money to buy the same songs over and over and over again.
right,
But it's
right,
not the band, it's the record label is the one that's
right,
doing it, and the band really has little to do with greatest hits albums that come out. It's the label will come to the band and say, "We want your input on this. You want to do liner notes, or do you want to put a cover on it, or what do you want to do?" But they're going to put the product out regardless.
Yeah.
right, right,
And that ties right into the SNA thing, regardless of whether they had the legalities to do it or not. It was a lot of people were looking at this and thinking this is not Chaplin quality,
right.
and but at the same time, Charlie had nothing to do with it. He was powerless to do anything.
And SNA gloated, and I'll post something to the Facebook page. They took out like a big spread that said SNA wins. It went to like the state Supreme Court. I mean, they gloated, and but people loved the film because it was Charlie in it. And then it wasn't until I don't know what year that Image released the two-reeler. I mean, I guess
The
it was like 10
'90s,
years. Yeah, the
yeah.
people seeing that, oh, this is the version that he wanted released. And like I said, it's unfortunate that it got mired in this because it's a great little film, just for the ending alone for me. But it's just a great little film.
Now the four-reel version is really only available now through public domain, cheapo public domain discs.
Yeah.
Right?
Um,
Yeah.
I don't know exactly what the new Blu-ray that's going to be coming out of the SNAs is going to be like, but personally, I'd love to have both versions of it. I'd love for them to
Hmm.
restore the SNA version just to kind of show you a comparison of how Chaplin edits something versus how
Right.
somebody who really doesn't have a clue is
Right.
putting it together. It'd be great if they had a commentary track on that to really explain. Although I guess we pretty much just did one.
Right.
Now
And
before we go, explain
mhm.
because you said that Ben Turpin left Essanay and then he went to Keystone, but yet here he is in the last Chaplin
Yeah,
Essanay.
that doesn't make sense to me.
Well, the Carmen was done in early 1916, so he was still with Essanay.
Okay.
Yeah, Ben Turpin wasn't in the Triple Trouble that was released 3 years later.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
yeah, so he was in Carmen, but it was probably done. I mean, it had to have been done between the end of December 1915 and March, because Carmen came out on Charlie's birthday, April 16th, 1916. So those scenes were shot right around that time period that Ben Turpin was still with Essanay.
When did Charlie start making negotiations with Mutual?
I think it was in the summer of 1915 that and then
It was
it
that
got,
quick, huh?
yeah, it got finalized. I think on February 26th of 1916, it got officially finalized. But despite all of this, SNA did want to retain Charlie Chaplin. They were willing to give him $500,000 for eight films. But he took Mutual that was giving him, what is it, 520,000 and the was that $50,000 sign-on bonus?
Something like that. It was like the biggest like movie contract up until
Right.
that time.
So
And,
when Charlie decided to leave SNA, he took a lot of people from SNA to Mutual. SNA had to be a little pissed off about that too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, he took Edna, he took John Rand, he took Leo White.
Raleigh.
Raleigh.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Raleigh Tolero. He took him. Well, no, actually, SNA, I don't know if they fired him or whatever, but Charlie met up with Raleigh at some point, and Raleigh was looking for work. And then Charlie says, why don't you come on board the Mutuals? There was a lot of bad blood between them, and it seems like Charlie, in his biography, I don't even recall if he even mentions SNA in any capacity. Though strangely, he lists Triple Trouble in his filmography. So it's kind of like,
That is
it's
strange.
funny. It's funny, like, we'll say, wow, he had a really good memory and, he was able to recall everything. But then something like that, I'm like, well, maybe, he just forgot. But I can't have it both
Who knows?
ways.
But he
Yeah,
did seem to
exactly.
remember he was a Keystone Cop, though, which a lot of people said he
Exactly.
was just forgetting everything.
Right,
Like,
right.
oh no,
Yes.
that doesn't exist.
Yes,
Nope,
exactly.
Nope, what I'm talking about.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
just to go back to like the last episode and think about all the nonsense that Charlie went through at SNA in that one year. He went to Chicago, then he came to Niles, then he went, to another studio, another SNA studio in California. Throughout all of this legal issues and all this stuff, he was still able to put out a lot of quality material.
Yeah.
Which is a testament to show how creative that he was, because
And dedicated.
going through all these crazy situations, being moved all over the country and all this stuff, he was still able to put out some good stuff.
The thing is, and also in that time period, he just exploded. I mean, the Chaplinitis, he was everywhere, and it just, 1915 was just an amazing year for him. And I don't think that he would ever have that crazy of a year as far as moving around. And really, when you think of a studio, it wasn't until, I guess, The Bank was probably the first film that he actually did in Los Angeles in that new studio. Before that, he did some of the work was done in the Bradbury Mansion, and then he did one on the beach. And like you said, then he's in Niles, then he's in Chicago. So, yeah.
You can only imagine how happy he was when he finally got his own studio.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Mutual treated him wonderfully. And I think he would have stayed with them. They were willing to pay him, but they weren't willing to give him the
Everything
complete control. Right, right.
Mm-hmm. Is this the first time that songs were written about a celebrity that were popular songs? Like those Charlie Chaplin feet and the Charlie Chaplin walk and
Right.
all these songs that just had his name in them. and they knew
Yeah.
if they put his name on a song that it would sell, even if he had nothing to do with it.
Right, exactly. I mean, no, I mean, it was unprecedented. He was the first. We were talking about celebrities and we mentioned, Elvis Presley, but like doing some research, like in the 1940s, Frank Sinatra was a big thing,
Yeah.
not on the level of Charlie Chaplin, but no, I don't think anybody before him was as popular or as so much into the popular culture as Charlie Chaplin was. Young and old alike loved him, and people made tons of money off of him. Tons of money, people selling things. The out and out. It blows my mind though when you think about it. The out and out impersonation, like Billy West, went on for years with that character, and he made money off of it. And it was like Charlie couldn't do anything about it.
The
So it
fact that
just,
these companies, like the Minerva Courtney movie, and
hmm
the children acting out Carmen,
right,
they could release a parody version of a Chaplin movie, and they knew it would sell.
right. And
All they had to do was put his name in it somewhere that it had something to do with him. Even if he wasn't in it, as long as it had something to do with him and somebody dressed up like him, they didn't care. People were so starved for Chaplin
yes,
material, which is shocking because look at all the stuff he put out in 1915.
Yeah.
There was still a demand for more,
right.
more, more. It was never enough, and he put
And
out
Keystones.
15 movies, or somewhere around that many movies in one year, and it still wasn't enough
It
for
wasn't.
people.
Especially
Right.
since at that time movies were still being cranked out. Like Keystone was just still doing like the once a week mentality, and which today that sounds insane, but it was just so easy to do. Like film it, print it, like edit it, print it, send it, distribute it, show it, make money. It was a
And the
simple process.
and the thing about Carmen too that I like is the tinting of the film. The nighttime scenes and the daytime scenes. I don't know how they did it, but they tinted the film in sepia, or I can't think of the color of it, but it brings a mood to the film.
It must
Um,
have been an inspiration from like Birth of a Nation, for example, which use a lot of new and innovative film techniques and cinematography.
Well, that's a question I have. The restored SNAs that came out, that are now, I guess, the inadequate ones because the Blu-ray's coming out, but they all feature tints. Now, I have a feeling that SNA did not tint these films upon their release in
no,
1915.
that was extra money, so they weren't, because speaking of extra money, one of the things I remember reading is when Charlie went to Chicago, and he would edit his films by looking at it. I think he had to have a machine to look at his films and edit them. And SNA was going by the negatives, and he demanded that they give him that machine. So they had to stop and get the machine, order it from California, and bring it over because that's the way he edited. I guess the other ones just looked at the, what do you call it?
The
The
negative?
negatives, yeah. And he had to see the real thing.
All right, so we pretty much wrapped this episode up.
Yep.
SNA is a long, but we had to get it all out. There was really no
Yeah,
way to speed through all this stuff because there's so many little
right,
intricate details. And at
Yeah.
the same
right,
time, I wanted to get through a little review of each film too, since we were doing
Yeah.
right,
that. Can
right.
you guys think of any kind of homework response from the fans on this one that they'd like to discuss that we discussed today?
Hmm. What do you think of Triple Trouble? Is it a Chaplin release? Did SNA have a right to release it without Chaplin's consent?
We could actually post Triple Trouble, find a copy of it,
Yeah, you
and
have it probably.
have people watch it so that they can
Understand.
see, yeah, exactly what we're talking about. And like I said, I mentioned earlier in earlier podcasts, I really admire the fact that Charlie did not harbor a resentment over Leo White, because he was the man that was behind both of those films, directing, the padded scenes, and Charlie didn't seem to, hold a grudge against him for that. So that's pretty, pretty awesome.
Yeah.
It's been 100 years of the Essanays.
Yeah.
I think they
I'm
still hold
tired.
up. Personally,
Yeah.
it feels like this show's been going on for 100 years.
Yeah, exactly.
But
Exactly.
they're
Yes.
definitely a piece of Chaplin's history that has seemed to be lost in a way. It was a really transitional period for him, and the films are worth looking at just due to the fact that you can see things that he would bring back later on into other films.
You can't call yourself well, I mean, you can, but I mean, in order to be a serious Chaplin fan, you have to be able to see the evolution. You
Yeah.
can't just say, "Oh, I like City Lights" or his features. You got to see what came before because you can actually
You
see him growing,
mhm.
and
Or not to
that's,
like just the features if you want, but you need to see the
right. Oh,
the
yes, yes.
films
Right.
to understand why he
Right.
to that point.
And
Right.
also, if you ever get a chance to go to Niles, the
Mhm.
really cool, apparently, I haven't been there, I'd love to go, but they have a little S&A museum with some cool stuff, and they have, I guess, a Chaplin event every June where they show
Sweet.
a bunch of his
But
films, and as well as the Chicago studio, which still stands. It's not a studio anymore. Something else goes on inside. It's just an office building or a gym or something. But the exterior of the whole building is still there as it was in 1915, as far as I know. Well, thanks for sitting through this S&A discussion, these 2 long episodes. Hopefully you learned some new things about it, as I did, certainly.
yeah.
And definitely go back and check those films out. And if you get a chance to check out the Niles Museum or the building in Chicago, go for it. Now, we're going to be getting off the S&As for a while. Not quite sure what our next discussion topic will be, but we hope you'll be there to listen. And thanks for listening to this one. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, guys.